I'm Heidi Sanborn. I'm the founding director of the National Stewardship Action Council. And we're going to go ahead. I'm going to first introduce some of the people who are working with us on this bill. It is SB 1066 by Senator Catherine Blakespear. She is from Southern California, Escondido, San Diego area. A lot of voters there. So we want to thank our amazing author of the bill. We also, and Nadia, her staff is on, and Nadia has been an incredible staffer to work with. We're very grateful to have her here, and she's available to take questions too on the bill and the process if I cannot answer it. So thank you, Nadia. And we also have our co-sponsors of the bill, Leslie Lukash and Courtney Scott with Zero Waste Sonoma. And the reason they're co-sponsors is they have a hazardous waste facility in Sonoma County, which has, I believe it was 67 miles of coastline, Leslie, a lot. And they've got a lot of boats, and they have no ability to accept marine flares yet. People will sneak them into the hazardous waste they do bring to the facility, so they end up with them anyway. And some prices are as high as $185 a flare, they estimate, to collect them or properly dispose of them after they've been kind of snuck into their facility. And I also want to introduce Justin Milan, who's been an incredible ally in this. And this is, I hope, a very successful thing for Justin as well. He's a world's traveled boater, and he also represents the Conference of Environmental Health Directors in California. So he actually wears two very important hats on this bill, and has provided incredible testimony from real life experience on the need for flares and also for proper disposal of flares. So with that, and of course, Jordan of our team, and she is the registered lobbyist for our National Stewardship Action Council, and leading the way on the bill. So with that, and I don't know if we've got anybody else on from our team like John or Larry, but I think that's it. So we'll go ahead and I'll get into the PowerPoint. And I'd like to invite all of you to please, if you have questions or you have a thought or something you want to share with the group, just use the chat. We're not going to use the Q&A because it's too hard for me to look in two different places at the same time. And in the chat, I can look very quickly and then decide if I have time to answer that question, or we'll move it to the end. Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead, and everybody else can turn off their camera so we can save bandwidth. And we'll go ahead and just talk about this. So this is a review session of what the bill is here in California, the first in the nation EPR bill for marine flares, how it's going, and where we are, and looking for your input. And again, if you're not familiar with our organization, we're now 8 years old, heading towards 9. And we have a vision of attaining an equitable circular economy in the United States, and we're driving it through policies on waste and waste reduction and recycling. And in this case, just capture and destroy, because that's really all we can do with flares. And you'll see we've got an SOS signal here because, quite frankly, these are so problematic. It's been very distressful, caused a lot of stress on people to have to deal with the disposal problems. Next slide, please. So this is who is here again, Nadia Mahalati, and from Senator Blakespear's office, who's leading the charge on the bill. Jordan and I, and then our partners in this, Leslie and Courtney from Zero Waste Sonoma. So thank you all for your support. Next slide, please. And we decided it'd be easier for me to just go through this myself, and then we'll take questions and check in the chat. So we want to play this video for a second first, because this is not just an environmental issue. It is a worker safety issue. And Jordan's going to go ahead, or Victoria is playing this video that was published in the UK. This material recovery facility worker, as you see here, is going to be grabbing that flare. He doesn't know what it is, and it's going to go off in his hand. And this is a real situation. Can you imagine how scary? Look how close to his face that is. And that's burning at, I believe, 1200 plus degrees. Could have caused very severe facial burns, and we're very lucky it didn't. But the UK government actually promoted this video because they wanted people to know that if you dispose of things like marine flares improperly, people can get seriously hurt. And of course, we have a problem with fires. We have a problem with insurance. Getting insurance in our industry is getting more difficult because of fires, and we are in the top 10 most dangerous businesses. So our employees need to be protected. And I feel strongly through this policy, we're doing everything in our power to make sure we capture them in a proper channel and make sure this sort of thing doesn't happen to our workers, which is why we have the support of the waste industry and the Teamsters, and we're very grateful for that. Next slide, please. So we can't do any of this without our sponsors, and I want to thank our sponsors. They're broad, they're all over the country. These are just our top donors. But what we do takes a lot of energy and effort, and it's very difficult. If you're not a member, please consider joining. You can join either the C3 organization, the Stewardship Action Foundation, or the C4 NSAC, which does the advocacy and lobbying. And this is our little team of 3 that does all of this with our partners and our board members. It's just Jordan and Victoria and I think there's never been a more effective organization with 3 people on staff than what we've been able to do. So again, hopefully you can join one of the 2 organizations, and we recommend local governments join the foundation, which is a safer place for them. Next slide, please. So again, I'm going to briefly go over what is a circular economy, because people use different definitions. We follow the Ellen MacArthur Foundation definition, which starts with designing waste and pollution out of the system. Source reduction. 2 is to keep products and materials in use. So recycling on one side for the industrial products that we've made that nature doesn't understand, and on nature's side, the organics and composting. And then we need to go back and regenerate the natural systems which we've harmed, which includes the ocean. And pretty much every ecosystem on Earth has now been severely impacted by our footprint of people. And this is just another example of, we sold something that's explosive that has no end of life plan, and it's also toxic, and it's, you know, all the things. So we want to make sure they get properly handled, and we need to decouple our economic growth from the consumption of finite resources, which is difficult because when I was born, there was 3.5 billion people on Earth. There is now over 8. And with that kind of population growth, that means our footprints have to be going way, way, way down, not up, in order to get there. So we've got a lot of work to do. Next slide, please. So policy options, we look at them all, just letting you know this. We've looked and used sales bans like mercury containing lighting, truth in labeling, to make sure that there are not lies on the label that mislead people to buy the wrong thing and then put it in the wrong bin, saying it's recyclable when it's not, for example. Product stewardship, which is a voluntary approach to reducing the impacts of a product. Advanced consumer fees, where a government will require a fee be added to the price of a product visibly, and then managed by either the government or the private sector. And then last, but my favorite, is extended producer responsibility, where the producers have the primary responsibility for the full end-of-life management of their product, because they know what's in it, they made it, they profited from it. Now they should not be externalizing all the rest of the end-of-life costs onto the rest of us, which includes the environment and government and the taxpayers and ratepayers. And we ask a lot of questions of ourselves before we decide which policy tool to use. But this one in particular, there's not a lot of choice. If we ban the sale, you've got an SOS signal option that some people feel for them is the right option. And we don't want to ban the sale of something that somebody considers very valuable to the safety of their boat and their lives. Truth in labeling is not going to solve the problem here, although I do think we have an issue with that. But to us, internalized cost of doing business is the right market signal to get the producers to pay the most attention to end-of-life costs. Next slide, please. And we've done this many times. So starting back in 2008, it started with agricultural pesticide containers, big 5-gallon plastic containers now have a mandatory EPR program in California, as do recalled products, because we had lead-based lunch boxes, painted lunch boxes that were showing up in hazardous waste facilities. And we're like, why are we paying for this? You weren't supposed to sell it. So now recalled products must be taken back by the producer. Then mercury thermostats. That's where I came in, being very active on that bill. Paint, carpet, mattresses, medications, and sharps, loose batteries, packaging we did in 2022. I was very instrumental in negotiating that bill, SB 54. And then mercury containing lighting, which we did ban in 2022. So the sale of fluorescent lighting went to effect January of this year for compacts and long tubes next year. Next slide, please. So you can see we take all these things and then we bring them nationally and all the lessons that we've learned. So we've got this long track record of success, and many are first in the nation, and we're very excited to do this bill, and hopefully it will be first in the nation with your help. Next slide, please. And we'll give you this slide deck, so if you want to, you don't have to take pictures of it or anything. We'll be happy to share it. Okay, so why did we pick flares this year? Because I've been hearing about flares since I started in this field 34 years ago. And I just can't believe we haven't done anything about it, that we're selling explosives that have literally no end-of-life plan. And they're required on boats that are longer than 16 feet long, that operate off the coasts, but also the Great Lakes, which is why I'm wearing my Petoskey stone from Michigan, where I went to high school, because the lakes and the states like Michigan that surround them have a big problem with these flares because they are required on all those boats. Now, there's a requirement if you do carry the flares to carry 3 for day and night use, or an approved alternative. And there is a safe alternative with an electronic signal that Orion, who sells pretty much exclusively in the United States, the flares, also sells an alternative, as does Sirius Signal. And I think another company, I'm trying to remember the name of it, but there's 3 that sell those electronic signals that can replace the flares, according to the US Coast Guard. Now the flares, it says here 36 months, but it's 42 months from the time of manufacture. And I thought I had changed that slide and corrected it. I'm sorry, it did not get into this deck. And they do contain toxic metals and pollutants, well beyond the explosivity of them. And they used to contain perchlorate. The manufacturer Orion has told us they took perchlorate out of these flares starting in 2022. That's fine. The ones that are coming back, still contain perchlorate. Most of them, were bought before the ones that were sold in 2022 and later are just going to start to come back. And our Division of Boating and Waterways has estimated 174,000 flares become outdated and waste annually. If somebody has better data on that, let us know. That's been challenged a bit by the opponents, but we haven't seen better data yet. So we also have found out that Sonoma County used to send their flares to Louisiana. There's a Clean Harbors plant there, but it has since closed. We've been told that the facility in Utah does not accept, there's an incinerator in Utah that does not accept explosives. So the only facility we know of left in the United States that's actually disposing of these and blowing them up in an open pit is in Missouri. So if you can imagine, from California, we're sending them all the way to the middle of the country, and they're explosives and having to be transported. So not a great idea, but the flares on the left were actually left in a box outside of a fire facility, fire department in Sonoma. And then on the right, those are just different types of flares that have been collected. Next slide, please. And there's been some surveys done. Alameda, San Mateo, and San Francisco conducted a survey. They worked together, and this was in 2014. And they asked people, prior to this event, what have you done with your expired or unwanted marine flares? And of course, some say things like they throw them in their trash can, which is how that poor gentleman ended up with that marine flare. So that's bad. That's illegal. Then keep them as backup on their boat. And a lot of people are doing that. So basically the boats themselves are becoming a storage unit for old flares. Justin's testified that makes him nervous. It certainly would make me nervous. I wouldn't want those on my boat, but that's what they're doing. Some shoot them in the air. It is a felony, a federal felony, if you send out a distress signal when there is not a distress situation. So that's actually an illegal thing to do. And then other, and we've heard a lot of different things that people do with their flares. And you can see how many people carry flares on their boat. 10 plus, they don't need 10 plus flares on their boat, but quite a large number of people did say that they're carrying more than 10 on their boat at any one time, partly because they don't know what to do with them. Now, of the boaters polled, and they polled over almost 1,700 people, asking them what do they do, and again, most of them are storing them on their boat, 56%. Some are firing them off on their own. Now, we don't know where those are going. About 9% of people are doing that. 0.5% are throwing them overboard. Now, again, they used to contain perchlorate, but they still contain heavy metals and other chemicals. We don't want to pollute our beautiful blue waters with these flares. We need to make sure people have an option besides throwing them overboard, but they're desperate because they don't know what to do. They've participated in legal burn days, apparently, in some locations. Some take them to the local hazardous disposal days, but again, most of the time we are not accepting explosives. So they're hiding them in their other hazardous waste. And that's how they found them in Sonoma County. They're trying to donate them for fire and police departments or Coast Guard. I know that they've been left outside Coast Guard offices. So there's lots of different things. We've also heard that one person is literally telling others to put them in 5-gallon buckets of water, let them dissolve, and then just dump the whole thing in the trash. So that will dry out and become dust. And that's heavy metals and other things that our workers are getting exposed to. So we can go to the next slide, please. Now, the costs can vary wildly on disposal. There are many, many variables, and we'll get into what those are. But they're purchased new for about $13 a piece per flare. And Sonoma, they had a very high per flare cost because even when they partnered with other jurisdictions, it ended up being about $185 a flare. They only had 2 5-gallon pails of them that were found, again, in other hazardous waste. Their facility does not legally accept them, but they ended up with them. And to ship them across the country, and tell me if I need any corrections here, Courtney, but you had to ship them all the way to Missouri. And because there wasn't a lot of efficiencies, it ended up being a very high cost. Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I know that a lot of other jurisdictions in California have the same problem that we did, where, like Heidi mentioned, flares would just come to us at the bottom of the box, and sometimes we would find them over the course of several months. But the reason why we had to actually ship them out was because our facility was getting our CUPA inspection, and we couldn't have them on site because of that inspection, because we're not supposed to have them according to our permit. And so in order to get them out of there, we had to focus on timeline over cost. And so that's why we had to just get them out when we could. And that's why it's so expensive. Ideally, we would have been able to collect more of a higher quantity of the flares and containers, but it just didn't work out with timing for us. And I know that happens in a lot of other jurisdictions.
And you're saying that the facility also in Louisiana is still operating, but they won't be handling explosives anymore.
That's correct. It's still an incinerator, and it's still operating as an incinerator, but their permit is changing so that they won't be taking explosives anymore.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for all that.
Sure.
And we're, again, if anybody has new information or can correct anything I'm saying, or, wants to build on it, please put that in the chat. Alameda County they have magazines. They have the official metal boxes to store class 4 explosives like flares, and their cost, because they can store them and then do a more efficient shipment, got down to $10.55 a flare. So we know that with different infrastructure, that was an investment to buy that magazine. And if anybody has a cost of one, I know we've got some general numbers, somebody can put them in the chat, but that really can get the costs way, way, way down and efficiencies of shipping. The Port of Los Angeles did an event and their cost was $43.06 a flare. And then when they brought it down to the level of per participant who showed up with flares, it was almost $1,000 per participant. So $939.37. These are, if we don't have efficiencies in this system, it's just too expensive and nobody can afford it, which is why we want a statewide harmonized program. And we'd love to make it national because we just can't continue like this. We're losing too many into the wrong places. Next slide, please. So we've introduced SB 1066, authored by Senator Catherine Blakespear, and again, co-sponsored with Zero Waste Sonoma. And this is going to require the producers of the flares, which we have found out is limited to Orion, because there's another company, Westcom, out of the UK. We did finally reach them. It was difficult to reach them. We finally got them on the phone and they said, we don't sell flares in the leisure boat market in the United States because we make them in Europe and to ship them costs too much. We can't compete against a US based company. So it's basically a monopoly or a single company that is selling that we know of. And we've talked to them about it. I think it's confirmed. They're the only ones that are selling these flares in the United States. So it would require them to implement a convenient take-back program. We have to define convenient, as I mentioned, so we'll talk to you about that and get your input. It would be required to have a 501c3 nonprofit to make sure it's for public benefit. We do not want this to be a private sector activity for the shareholders' benefit. Why? Because then shareholders drive the train and they want profit. They're not interested, and that's not their goal, is public benefit. So that's why we do that. And that has been advised to us by legal counsel. The Department of Toxic Substances Control would be the overseeing agency in California. And that producer-run organization would have to be approved by them by January of 2027. The regulations would need to be adopted by July of 2027. So they'd have to get those regulations adopted by then, and then they can be enforced. They'd be required the producer would have to develop a 5-year stewardship plan and budgets on how they'd fund it. And there would be penalties up to $50,000 a day for failing to comply. Now, again, the convenience standard is where we'd really like to see some help because how do you define convenience for boaters and coastal areas? And we want to talk to you about that. But I did want to note in the chat, Claire has mentioned that it would be great if roadside flares weren't included. As an emergency responder for almost 10 years, I've seen a lot of non-bird road flares. And as Elizabeth is sharing, they can be accepted. The road flares are not the same. And they can be accepted in hazardous waste programs because they are not considered explosives, but they are flammable. But flammables, they can take at the hazardous waste facilities. So glad to clear some of these up, these issues. Next slide, please. So the 5-year producer responsibility plan means the producers, from the way the bill is written now, would have to form, as I mentioned, the 501c3 and develop a flare management plan. And the plan shall include, meaning they must include, the following. And that's that plan is due 9 months after the regs are effective. And that would be things like how the program will be sustainably funded, how the program will comply with Department of Toxic Substances Control established performance standards, so that will be in the regulations, and the dates of compliance, and how they will manage all the covered products at end of life. So exactly what's happening with the materials, they'd have to explain all that. And then provide free and convenient collection at end of life. You cannot charge people at end of life, because what we know happens is if that flare is expired and has no value to them, they are not going to pay to dispose of it. They'll do the wrong thing. A lot of people will. So we need permanent, and we're offering also as well as temporary collection sites. And we're open to all ideas on this. We've heard that maybe in New Jersey, there was some collection that had a portable destruction unit. We've never seen that in California. I'd like to know more about that if anybody's got information on that. And they have to provide information for consumers on how to avoid improper disposal, because again, we don't want to see this being thrown overboard or left in their garage. And then a contingency plan on what to do if there's any problem with this program. For example, we're getting very close to not having any place to bring these explosives in the United States. The amount of disposal locations keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and we're down to one. Well, what happens if they all of a sudden can't operate or they go bankrupt? What are we going to do? There's literally no place to bring them. So this is becoming a situation. Next slide, please. So the timeline in the bill, and this is me presenting up in South Lake Tahoe very recently, about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. This is the California Boating Safety Officers Association annual meeting. We had about 200 people there, and they all were telling me stories, by the way, of problems that they've had disposing of flares. In fact, one gentleman from Santa Barbara said that they don't know what to do with them, so they literally ask their fireworks display operator in Santa Barbara to take them annually, but he doesn't know if they're going to keep doing it every year. And other people came up to me and told me a lot of different stories. So it is a problem. The effective date of the bill would be next year, if we can get it passed. So far, we're doing very well on that. We're getting 11-0 votes. 180 days after the effective date of the bill, the producers have to notify the state with their intent to comply. In January of 2027, 2 years later, the department would have to approve who's running the program. And 90 days after that approval, the producers must register with the state, or producers of the product have to register with the pro. And in this situation, there may only be one producer. So obviously that would be an interesting, they wouldn't need to register with themselves. The regulations must be adopted by July of 2027. Then 30 days after the effective date, the producers have to register with the pro. 9 months after the effective date of the regulations, the plan would be due to the department. And then they'd have to approve, disapprove, or in part, like a conditional approval, their plan. And they'd have an opportunity to fix it and resubmit it, but only once. Next slide, please. So the bill went through the Environmental Quality Committee first on April 3rd. The video, I highly encourage you to watch it. It's on YouTube, on our NSAC YouTube channel. It was very interesting, had excellent comments by the committee members, but that got out with a 7-0 vote. So clearly strong support for this bill. And we were very pleased with that. It was bipartisan support as well. And next slide, please. And there's Justin giving incredible testimony as a boater, but I thought this quote was very powerful. I'm not prepared to just throw it in the water. I'm not prepared to just flare it off when I'm not supposed to. I'm not prepared to drop it off at a solid waste facility where I know someone can get injured and hurt. It is extremely frustrating for boaters to find a place to properly manage these flares at the end of their useful life. So again, sometimes the most powerful testimony isn't necessarily from the hat with the environmental health directors, but just as a personal boater, I think Justin speaks with an incredibly powerful voice on this issue. Next slide, please. So then the next hearing was in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and we were heard there on the 16th of April. And these members, again, We thank them for voting yes, and it was bipartisan again. We were very pleased with an 11-0 vote. And there again, if you go to the NSAC YouTube channel, you can see that hearing, you can see who testified, but I think it was an incredible hearing. And again, some of the comments, the arguments made and the committee's response back were very, very powerful. Next slide. I think we've got one of those quotes from one of the members. This came from Senator Wilk, and he said, I think this is a great bill. I think those people should be paying the cost of it. And if the flares cost more, the flares cost more because they shouldn't put those costs on other people. I'm sorry, but if you can afford a boat, I think you can afford flares. I didn't think that was a very good argument, just for future reference. That was an argument made by the opponents that not every boater has a lot of money, and that if the cost of flares goes up, then they wouldn't buy flares. Now they do have that electronic alternative, which has also been approved, but we do want them to have access to flares. But he didn't think that was a very good argument. And we agree. Next slide, please. So the next step is to go to the Senate Appropriations Committee. These are the members. So they're going to hear this bill and appropriations at 10 a.m. is the hearing for May 16th. That's next Thursday. And we will know how they vote at that time. They vote, appropriations is supposed to be about just the money. It often is a little of both. But we don't know yet how that will turn out. That's where a lot of bills go today, and we are in a tough budget situation. Even though these bills, extended producer responsibility, does pay, the producers pay for the oversight of that program. So that's where costs come in and so forth. And I know the committee did post their analysis already. We've found a few mistakes in it, and so, well, we're going to be reaching out to them to make sure they know what we know, and it might be updated. So if there's an update, we'll be certainly happy to share it with everybody. And I'm looking at the chat real quick, and I just want to say, see, Dave Nightingale said there have been a few manufacturers of mobile disposal units for flares and smaller caliber munitions. If I recall correctly, they've been by some sheriff's departments. Yes, because they are mobile, they get around air emission regs in many states, but I doubt that DTSC or Cal EPA would allow those in California. Thank you, Dave. That's very, very helpful to know. And Courtney mentioned that for clarification, LED flares are not approved for daytime use. They come with a flag. Yeah, but they do come with the flag that is approved for daytime use. So obviously it's easier to see a bright light at night than during the day. So smoke, big orange flag, and sometimes smoke can accompany the in the daytime to make sure that those visual distress signals are will work. Well, there's something that will work during the day, but they are U.S. Coast Guard approved, and they're sent as a kit. Next slide, please. So I want to thank Jordan and all of our team. I think there's incredible support for this bill. It became clear to me very early that while some might feel that this is a niche issue, it really is bringing up a bigger issue, which is that we don't have any disposal of explosives in this state, really. And that includes ammunitions and fireworks. So there's a lot of problems. Flares are just for boaters, but boaters are on water and we don't want the water polluted. But it really has brought out a lot of support, and fire department, the firefighters support it, local governments support it. I've even talked to one city manager who says he's storing excess flares in his garage, and I'm sure his fire department wouldn't want to know that because that's where a lot of fires start, is in the garages. Next slide, please. So if you're interested in supporting and you haven't already, we would welcome you. We're thrilled to have recently gotten, as I said, the Professional Firefighters Association of California and the Maritime Institute, and more coming on all the time. But we definitely need to show broad support, because the opponents are there and very wanting to change this. So next slide, please. But we are eager to talk to them. So On the opponents, we have 3 opponents groups that have so far registered their opposition. The manufacturer as Orion, the National Marine Manufacturers Association, and the Recreational Boaters of California. I can tell you, I just got in my inbox this morning, 2 people that are RBOC members that are pretty upset and feel that their association is not reflective of their position as voters. So I'm not sure how that's going to be playing out, but I know a lot of voters myself who are saying they really want something done. So next slide, please. And we'll get into some of the detailed opposition. So these are actual quotes. So we're not speaking, this is exactly what has been said. Orion said handheld flares are relatively easy to dispose of by boaters. I don't know any boater that says that. That the flares are exempt from the ATF storage requirements. We don't think that they might be for them, the manufacturer, but not for the rest of us. All flares are not the same, that handheld flares can be safely burned on the ground by the boater. We've asked for ash tests to California standards. We have not received those yet. I was a little shocked at that one. Past experience indicates that local community-oriented solution is likely more viable than a broad-based initiative such as SB 1066 as a result of the regulatory burdens imposed. And I will just tell everybody here, we love local-oriented solutions. What we don't love is when locals are having to pay for outrageous costs for a product that they did not profit from and they don't manufacture and so forth. So again, we're shifting the cost from the boater to everybody else that's a non-boater, the way the system is set up now. And that's part of what we're trying to fix. They've also claimed that they only sell $465,000 in handheld and aerial flares into California, and that the typical producer-run approach would not make sense. Well, I guess that's a cost argument, that the cost is more than they're making. So just wanting you all to know that these are the real arguments that are being used. Next slide, please. Now, for the other 2 opponents, RBOC has said that the provisions avoid a significant cost impact on the individual boaters that could become a disincentive to purchase again. It's about the cost. That the legislation is more likely to significantly increase the price boaters pay. My hope is that we get the price down to the lowest that we've seen, which is $10 and some odd cents per flare, which would mean we'd go from $13 a flare to $23, $24, $25 a flare. Just FYI. And they only need them every 42 months for manufacture. And then we'd like to know more about those costs, but at this stage, it appears that the burden might drive effective night flares completely out of the market. So their fear is that Orion simply won't sell them anymore. Then National Marine Manufacturers Association has claimed that many marine flare manufacturers and distributors have already developed comprehensive plans for retrieval and disposal of expired marine flares. If anybody's aware of these developed plans that are comprehensive to collect flares, please let us know. We have not seen anything to that effect. They also claim that in mandating marine flare manufacturers develop a producer responsibility plan for California, the safe and proper management of covered products will inevitably drive up costs to consumers and force consumers to use less effective safety equipment. So I guess they're claiming that the signals that were approved by the Coast Guard are less effective, but I haven't had the Coast Guard say that. They also claim the average boater in the United States makes $75,000 a year or less. I would have to say the average boater does not have an ocean boat or a boat on the Great Lakes. But that's a guess. And so we're just not arguing on that point at this point, but it does sound funny to us. Next slide, please. So we are requesting your input. If you have done a marine flare collection, we would love to know how it worked and any information you have on the costs. If you have any suggestions on how we would set a performance standard for this program or a convenience standard, we would love to know that too. We saw that there is a collection event in New Jersey next month, I believe. We're trying to get information on that. We definitely want help. If anybody's got, because what we'd like to do is create a model bill that all of you in the other states can use. And that means that we need to know more about how it's working for all of you. So we've thought of a lot of different things, but as far as what a convenience standard would be, this in California, they should only be on coastal areas, but I can tell you they're selling them, it seems, everywhere in the state. So we're open to only operating these on the coast, but that means that the sales have to stop somewhere else, everywhere else. Otherwise, they're going to end up with just no collection opportunity in places like Lake Tahoe, where they are selling them. The bill right now, the performance standards will be, and associated metrics will basically be set in the regulations by DTSC, but we would like to get as much in the bill as we possibly can. But it's, again, do we do, mandate that every dock has a magazine so that flares can be dropped off with the clean boating program? Who's going to pay for that? I'd like to see it so that people don't have to go very far off the dock and don't have to transport explosives in their car. But, who's going to pay for those magazines? It's going to have to be somebody else, the producers, because we don't have enough money. And then we could do milk runs, maybe up and down the coast. It's one thought that we've had, or at least at some of the coastal HHWs having these magazines. But we have to figure out what convenience standard we're going to look for. Clearly, retailers can't and won't take these back, nor should they probably, because they wouldn't want them back in the store after their expiry date. The department may adjust performance standards and compliance dates based on new information that they have, and the department waste characterization studies and other relevant information. So that's in the bill now. And they will have to publish those performance standards, and the pro will meet them. So if anybody's got ideas on this, we would love to hear about it. And then Elizabeth's agreeing in the chat that yes, the collection should be at the place where there's the boat. And that's actually what they're doing now for the Clean and Green Boating Program for oil and other products, we understand, that are on boats. Now, Ophelia is asking if there's been any feedback from the California Association of Port Authorities or harbors. Yes, on harbors, no on the port authorities. So if anybody's got a contact at the port authorities, please let us know. We would love to talk to them. Next slide, please. And on public education, we're also requesting feedback because, and thank you, Ophelia, please, you can put them in the chat, do direct messaging, email us. That's awesome. We would love to talk to more people. That's one of the questions I was going to have for all of you. If there's other people we should be reaching out to. I'm not a boater. I love boats. I go on boats, but I'm not a boater. So we don't know what we don't know. And if there's other groups out there we should be talking to, that's a big part of this webinar, is please tell us, who are we missing? Who can we reach out to and enroll in this to make sure we do this correctly? But we do want updates from you on public education, because one of the things I'm concerned about is, promoting these as safely disposed of at home on the ground. I still, we're asking for DTSC help with that, but without an ash test, I don't see how that's possible. I can't imagine how that's safe. There's noise impacts, there's the ash, possibility of fire in a state that's been on fire for years, it seems. So I'm not sure the fire marshal would like that either. So they would not be able to promote anything other than what the program for collection is. And the reason that's important is we had this problem on the pharmaceuticals bill where the manufacturers wanted to promote safe garbage disposal because it was illegal, but that wasn't why we set up the program. The program is all they're allowed to promote, which was the medicine bins. Same for this. We're going to limit it to that safe collection program. So, and public education, including information for consumers on how to avoid improper disposal like what not to do, because that's just as important sometimes as telling them what to do. Include a description of the education and outreach efforts to various audiences, including but not limited to the consumers, to promote their participation in achieving the purposes of the collection plan. And these education materials shall include, but not be limited to, an internet website, signage at the point of sale and in marinas, all signage and material required for collection sites, and explaining promotional materials should explain the purpose of the pro and the means by which it is managing the products. So if we missed anything there, please let us know if you have any examples. And then also a description of the strategies, goals, and metrics the pro will use to annually assess and evaluate the efficiency or the efficacy of the comprehensive statewide education and outreach program. Okay, so we can go to the next slide, please. I can see lots going on in the chat about the magazines and so forth. So this is a picture on the right of our great champion, Senator Blake Spear, holding up a picture of the Marine flare box that was left in front of the Sonoma Fire Department just a month or two ago. And then our own co-sponsor, Leslie Lukash, with the same picture, making sure people know. A lot of people don't know what these even look like. In the chat, I know there's a picture of the Alameda magazine, which has got to be gated and it's got a special permit, but it's a big metal box that if things explode, it's not going to take everything out with it. So if you have any information to share, you can put you can put your email and my email in the chat. We're happy to receive information directly from you. We would like to know more about, again, who we should be reaching out to if there's any other stakeholders that we're not aware of. Do you have any pictures of illegally dumped flares or have verifiable stories of illegal disposal? A picture can speak 1,000 words, and we'd really appreciate any help putting together the picture of the problem. And if we forgot to address anything in the bill, please mention that too. We want this again to be a really good model. And if you've conducted your events, please share that information with us. Any data we have, we will share with you, and vice versa. That'd be great. Next slide, please. So there's been some press on this issue about this bill. Some of it's accurate, some of it isn't. There's been an article in the log, which we were interviewed for, and the log goes out to a lot of boaters down in Southern California. It's starting to get around that this is happening. And I think, you know, now because we've had such high votes that are bipartisan, it's about the cost of the program and ensuring that people know that the manufacturers are paying for the cost. We can get out of appropriations and get on to negotiating how this is going to work and trying to get the cost down any way we possibly can. But again, it is not a county by county approach. That's what we have now, and it's totally inefficient. Next slide, please. So the next steps are, you know, we're just going to continue to talk with the opponents, get any new information. We've heard from them that there's been some events, as I said, in New Jersey and other places where they've got some sort of mobile disposal unit. We'd like to know more about that, work with DTSC if that's even possible to do here. And of course, we'd like to see us dispose of our own things in California, but right now that's not possible, but we'd like to make it possible if at all possible. And then the meetings with the opposition, we've asked actually, we had a talk with them on Thursday, and hopefully we can get a meeting later this week. But that's the only way to try and solve these problems. And sometimes bills are the best way to start those conversations because they're very hard to get without a bill, unfortunately. And bill amendments could be done if we see anything to improve, and then goes off to the Senate floor if it gets out of appropriations, and then onto the Assembly side and the Assembly floor for the governor's signature after that. So the latest it would be off, I believe it's the end of August, And then the governor has all of September to decide to sign the bill or not, if it were to get that far, hopefully. So next slide. At this point, I just want to put up our contact information. And so everybody can contact any one of us, send information. If there's anybody out there who wants to talk directly with our author's office, Nadia's made herself available with her email and a phone number. The sponsors, we're all here. We're all ears, and we want to do this right. So if you have anything you can share with us, let us know. And with that, I will say we should open it up for questions. See if anybody has any other questions, and I can look.
We have quite a bit of time too, so.
Yeah.
So it looks like Huey has his hand raised.
Oh yeah, we can let him speak. Go ahead and
Yeah,
just.
no, there's no, go ahead, Huey.
Hi, Heidi. Thank you
Hi.
for putting this together.
Of course.
So I heard when the bill was introduced, and then there was a representative from Orion. He had some pretty good points, and I'm not clear on what he mentioned, but there was 2 points that stood out. There was one regarding the use of perchlorate in their flares, and that they are no longer using that apparently. Now, can you speak on that? Is that true with other waste, and how does that affect, shipment? And
Nobody's
classification
verified
of
that, but I wouldn't disbelieve them. And I'm thrilled that they got perchlorate out and they stopped selling it in 2022. That's very good because perchlorate, as we all know, is very, very, very bad. But that does not change that flares currently have heavy metals and other things. And Courtney, your head's nodding. I know you know this better than me, so you might want to jump in on what else is in the flares.
Yeah, they're still considered a class 1.4 explosives. I've checked out all of the safety data sheets for all of Orion's products, and all of the flares are still considered a 1.4 explosive. So we're happy that they took perchlorate out, but there's still other chemicals in there, still toxic and still explosive. I think I'll try to pull up an SDS and see what other categories are in there, but those are the hazard classes that are coming off the top of my head.
And
I
according
think they
to
had
that
carbon-
was as of December of 2022. So since the flares last for 42 months, that all the flares we're seeing now that are expired are gonna contain the potassium perchlorate.
Yeah, and then also they mentioned that something along the lines of DOT exemption, or they were saying something about transporting these marine flares should be easier.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And by the way, for those who don't know, he works with hazardous waste products in San Francisco. They said that they had an exemption from the Department of Transportation
From
that,
ATF.
No.
From
or
ATF.
ATF for
ATF.
so they didn't think we needed the magazines. So Courtney, you can explain this because your fire department requires them no matter what anybody else says. And we did get a copy of that ATF exemption. It was very specific to Orion, I believe.
Yeah, the ATF exemption was just for Orion products, but that's just for storage. That's not even for transportation. So the DOT still classifies them as explosives, and our local fire departments will still require separate permitting for storing them in a magazine. So I think locally, my fire department said that I had to keep them 75 to 100 feet away from any building. And then, yeah, there's just a separate permitting process. So the only exemption that Orion currently has that we've seen is the ATF, which is the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
Yeah, that's helpful because the way they presented felt like it was okay to store these anywhere. Or thanks for the clarification.
Well, and that's why lobbying bills takes a lot of energy. I mean, Courtney and Leslie are seeing it up close and personal on this bill, co-sponsoring for the first time, but we're constantly, almost daily, trying to check information and make sure, and we appreciate it when even the opposition has given us some information we didn't have. We all want to get the facts out there and get it straight, but people have their positions and they're trying to push it, and sometimes it comes off. So we have to make sure that we're there to make sure the facts get to everybody. And when you have multiple committee members that are very, very busy, it takes a lot of time to do that.
And we have a fact versus fiction that'll be coming out about the bill and the opponent's claims that'll be distributed to everybody on this call.
And I want to say, I don't want to just paint them as opponents. We are talking with them. We reached out to the RBOC, Recreational Boaters of California, in December. We did not actually have a response until January. We've tried, it's been very difficult to get a hold of. And in fact, we sent an email to the wrong Orion. It seems it was a different company, and trying to get everybody has been difficult because they're not in California. They're all in other countries or on the East Coast. And so we finally got, I think, everybody involved directly, but I think there's a lot of people out there that still don't know this happening. So if you've got yacht clubs, anybody in your jurisdiction in California that needs to know about this, or even around the country, we would appreciate the help. Knowing that they're out there and connecting us with them. Anybody else? Kathy, did you have a?
Yeah, hi, this is Kathy Rico. I'm with Zero Waste Marine. It seems like when it comes to this type of, hazardous waste, the main conflict with corporations like this is that they're looking everything from the regulatory ending, which is more from a material instead of a waste. And I see how they use these types of arguments to justify why they don't see any of these as an issue. So it sounds like, there is a little bit of understanding and more like educational aspect, because I saw this through like to the sharps and the pharmaceuticals, and just in general when we're trying to support a lot of these bills, they're just regulations that are just different, that they're just not familiar with it. Of course, they're gonna try to find any excuse to stop incorporating any of these things. But I think that just in general, with the experience I have had within the industry, that's the main issue, that they're just looking at it from the business perspective. And especially when it comes to households, the generation of waste, it's a lot of times, as you were saying, like, for example, in the medical act with sharps, like before it was like just toss it in the garbage because it's a household generated, right? But it's still, there is a risk when it comes just to the public. So I think
that's exactly what we encountered with the ATF exemption that they sent us. They didn't quite understand the product versus waste aspect and how different categories have different regulatory requirements and different agencies managing those regulations. So that's definitely been a big part of this for us.
And Heidi, I think that probably another people that will be interested to contact is, and I'm sure that, those of you who have water near you and boats are, have access to the water. We see, for example, here in Marin County, a lot of schools, like training schools that they actually have marine flares, like they're teaching people how to sail and, other type of like, I don't know, like fishing and things like that. And what we noticed when we hosted our event is that some of these businesses were trying to come to us to get rid of those flares because they didn't know how to dispose of them. So it's not just from the residents, but like these little businesses as well, that they don't know how to handle this.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. We've heard that too from other people. The bottom line is, in my world, nothing should be sold that has no end of life plan. But what definitely should not be sold without an end of life plan are things that are hazardous or explosive, which takes it to a whole nother level. And I think this has been an eye-opener for a lot of the legislators. They had no idea that boaters had no disposal options for their flares. And this has been a big wake up call because they're hearing from their jurisdictions, yes, this is a big cost. Yes, this is a big problem. We need help. Now, one of the things I want to point out too is one of the suggestions was to increase the gas tax to cover it. Well, increasing taxes is about, as popular as lead balloons. So we were not very excited about that. Again, that socializes costs on people that have gas, and that's not all boaters. The other thing they suggested was putting it in the clean and green boater program, but that I understand is already underfunded. We're actually already in process of, I've asked Boating and Waterways if they can give us more information on how they're funded and would it even be possible to add this and how much money would they need to do something like that. So we're happy to investigate, ways to do this. But one place where I know we disagree, because I did speak to their lobbyist about this last week, I fundamentally don't believe it's fair to make other people pay for the boater's waste. Very few people benefit from the boat. It's pretty much the boater. So why, if they're required to have these things and it's to save their lives and their boat, why would the rest of people, some people who don't even own their own house, have to support a boater that has enough, at least disposable income to buy a boat? I don't even care if it's a dinghy. Some people don't even have more than an apartment. They don't even know if they can make the next meal. Why should they have to support this? They don't believe in that. And they've told me they just think that socialization of costs is fine. They see no problem with that. So that's a hard disagreement, but that doesn't mean we still can't get to a solution that we can all agree on. We're going to still work very hard at that. So yeah, those are the big questions. Does anybody else have any questions or any information they want to share? Because there's a lot of people on.
Or any suggestions for convenience standards?
Yeah. And it would be great if we could find out if California can legally use these. We have asked DTSC to let us know if it is possible to use that mobile destruction units. We don't know yet. But again, if they could be used, then they could also be used for the fireworks and the ammunition, which is those two are also big problems. And see, David Wyatt said that they were using them in Florida. So if anybody's on from Florida, that would be great. If you could let us know how you're all doing it. We've got some emails out to our friends in Connecticut and some other states to see what they're doing. They've all responded, we couldn't be on, we're going to watch the video later, but we all have this problem. Thank you for taking the lead. Keep us in the loop and we'll give you information as we can. So I suspect a lot of people are going to be watching this webinar and following up.
I think that could be really good because let's say thinking about something like pain care, like if they go, whoever runs these vehicles, they can track of where they went and then they can get reimbursed or something by the industry for those services. If it's something that is like that, or even the industry, itself pays for that. And then they can just give a report like pain care does on how many sites they visited and how many,
Well, but this we have had a direct response from Orion that if this is too costly and it's gonna cost way more than what they're paying, and they don't feel. I personally feel that boaters would have, and Justin, I believe, testified to this, that there's a lot of elasticity when you have a product that's basically mandated to be on your boat. And people's lives and their boats are at, their safety's at risk if they don't have an ability to flag down help when there's an emergency. So people are willing to pay to ensure compliance and their life and property are safe. And if we went from $13 a flare, let's say it went up more than doubled to 30. I personally, if it were me, I wouldn't even blink. But that, other people are claiming that's enough, that boaters aren't going to buy them. They could buy those signals that are about $99, but those signals last for a very long time and take rechargeable batteries. And they're accepted obviously in battery and electronics recycling. So their end of life problems are nothing compared to flares. So we've seen a lot of good talk and ideas in the chat. I would ask for everybody, if you're interested in following us on this issue, we have an entire listserv just for marine flares, and we're just going to be putting out information direct. Please join us. This costs a lot of money to run these bills, and it takes a lot of time to do right. So if you can join us, that would be fantastic. And Jordan's saying we can buy them as low as 60. Thank you, Jordan. But that would be very helpful as well. You can go online and donate. It's 175 an individual, 500 or up for an organization. But this is a very expensive endeavor to do these things. Any other questions, comments, thoughts?
Like
Okay.
Claire said, she likes the idea of doing biannual temporary events at marinas, kind of like the drug take back days.
It would be nice if we did like the US Coast Guard did that as like a national promotion in partnership with the manufacturer. And then everybody knew when they were and kind of planned on it. But then again, how many transport vehicles are there in the United States? And we've only got one disposal location left. To me, one of the most concerning things is to learn that there's only one disposal location in the entire nation left for these. And I just saw that the EPA came out with rules on open pit explosion destruction units. What if they consider that to be too onerous and decide to shut that one facility in Missouri? Then we got nothing. How can we sell things that we have no end of life plan for at all in the United States? I've never seen anything like this. So we have to solve this. Courtney, do you have anything to speak to that?
Yeah, I have brand new information as of 10 minutes ago that there is another disposal facility in Illinois.
Okay, so we have two, but they're both in the middle of the country. So Illinois, and which facility is that?
It's a Veolia facility.
Veolia, okay. Excellent. See, that's the thing. It's taking a long time to dig in to get all this information. So Veolia and in Illinois. So we have Missouri and Illinois.
Yes.
Okay. And is the Veolia plant, is that an incinerator?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we have an incinerator and an open pit explosion destruction unit. So two. I still find that kind of shocking. And the coasts have nothing. So we're having to ship all these explosives across many, many, many states to get there.
Well, and that's the reason why the cost is so expensive when it comes to
That's right.
disposal.
Mostly it's transportation. Not anybody can transport explosives across state lines. That's a very rough, permitting situation. Heather? Hi, Heather. It's good to hear.
Hey, good. Hi, everybody. Heather Trim with Zero Waste Washington. I realize I have not changed my name here in Seattle. This has been super interesting. And I have a basic question, which is, I am guessing that most people are not disposing of their flares. They're just letting them sit in their boat and letting it go way past the expiration date, which sounds like a compliance issue as well. Is because we aren't hearing about a ton of explosions, so we know that even though they could explode, they are not. They might be dumping them in the landfill, for all we know. Do you have an idea of what boaters are doing now? Like,
yes, and we did
what are
cover
they-
that at the beginning. There were some surveys done, and we can actually go back and show those couple of slides. But we've got the whole report from Alameda, San Francisco. I can't remember who else was working. There's 3 jurisdictions that worked on it, and they did a survey. It's kind of old, but it's basically most people are storing on the boats. Some people are throwing in the trash. Some are blowing. Actually, we had a letter from a yacht club member in Sonoma County who said he's literally telling people, and has been himself, disintegrating them into water in a 5-gallon bucket and then dumping that in the trash. We've heard people going to the desert to blow them up on vacation. I'm sure BLM and others have issues with that. But again, we don't know the ash. I mean, I've asked for the ash data because they even mentioned something like, well, they could go into a fire pit. And I'm like, I don't know. This doesn't sound, unless somebody's verifying all this stuff is safe. I don't know. And then you're not supposed to set them off. Some people are setting them off, or they're waiting till the 4th of July to set them off, but it's considered an SOS signal. So it's a federal felony to let them off if you're not in an emergency.
And is it against the law to have one that's expired?
No, it's just against the law to have a boat that has no approved SOS signal that's not expired. You can keep them. And what we've heard from Orion is that they don't degrade they degrade and become less effective, but they don't become like more explosive or unstable. They've asked us to not use those. So that's fine. Apparently they're not becoming unstable, just less effective. Like they might be less bright, have a harder time lighting them. That's the way I understand it from what they've told us. Now, have you got any problems with this up in Washington State, Heather? I'm sure you do.
My understanding is we have the highest boater per capita ratio in the country.
Oh, wow.
And so we would be very interested in doing this bill in Washington State as well. And I have not heard about it, but Rick Gilbert is on the line. Rick is front line on this. Rick, are you still here? He runs he has run a household hazardous waste.
I stepped away. What was your question, Heather?
Oh, we were just wondering, what it's like. Are you seeing a lot of marine flares, Rick? Do you have a lot of these issues in Washington State?
Yeah, we get some periodically. People try to drop them off. We're still able to refer them to the state patrol locally, who are still taking explosives. I just heard information that our sheriff's department might be doing an event. So if I can get more information on that, I'll let you know. We don't take them obviously at our HHW facility, but we did get contingency pricing through our hazardous waste management vendor. And our current pricing for marine flares is $5,198.38 for a 5-gallon bucket that is half full of water. So obviously it is prohibitively expensive, and it backs up the extreme costs that a lot of other people are quoting as well.
Well, then, I mean, this just to me underscores the need for us all to work together to find a solution. And we've told Orion and the boaters, our goal is not to make someone pay outrageous costs if it's unnecessary. We want to design the most cost-effective, safe system as possible that's convenient, where we're going to get them all back or darn close to it, because we should, especially when they're explosives. And we're not even close right now. Not even close. In fact, driving them into the wrong places. And now DTSC is clear about that. So, I mean, some people say, oh, it's not time. When is it time? How long do we have to wait? How many years? Everybody's known it's been a problem for decades. I'm actually just delighted we finally found a legislator who's interested in carrying it, because, people told her, hey, it's a niche issue. It's not really that big of a deal. But it's actually unlocked to me that there's a bigger problem out there with all explosives, being fireworks and ammunition as well. And DTSC has understanding that too. But nationally, we've got a problem here and we need to fix it. So hopefully we can all work together. And so if anybody hasn't joined us yet, if you're a nonprofit, it's free. If you're a collaborating nonprofit, we'll get you on the listserv. We'll put you on the Marine Flare listserv. If you're not a not-for-profit, then just email us, join us, even if it's individual membership. We'd love to have you join us so that you can help us get this done and get this right. Again, my hope is that soon we don't sell things that are dangerous and toxic, but that don't have any end-of-life plan. And I hope that for everything, but the most toxic stuff first. So any other questions or thoughts that anybody would like to share? Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. We'll probably do this again. Hopefully, fingers crossed, by next Thursday, we can report that we get out of appropriations and keep working with our the opponents and finding a way hopefully forward. But we do have to find a way forward. So if it doesn't work at the state level, chances are good it's going to start at the ordinance level in counties, because they simply can't afford this anymore. So, and we don't want it to dissolve to that. We'd rather have it be a statewide solution and national solution. All right. Well, thank you to all the team for being on. Thanks to Nadia and the Senator Blakespear for being our champions of marine flares and helping us get this done, and to our co-sponsors, Leslie and Courtney, and everybody who's helping on the bill. Thanks again. And thanks, Claire. We'll look forward to hopefully talking to you soon, giving you some good news, and we'll keep on moving. Thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.
Keep voting.